the 1 as opposed to 4. He also has the full 4 Rattleclaw Mystics, but he does not have Sylvan Caryatid. No copies of Sylvan Caryatid in the main deck, only the 4 Rattleclaw Mystics. Instead, he has more business spells, Elvish Mystic, and Heir of the Wilds. Which, for my money, by the way, Heir of the Wilds is the better green 2-drop than Sylvan Caryatid.
So he eschews a little bit of mana production and to get another threat into his deck.
Absolutely, yeah. As we see, Dave looks like he won the die roll here, and he leads off with a salt-crusted Sandstep Citadel? Sandstep Citadel. I keep saying salt.
You've had a problem with that card all weekend. It's the only card that gets you, too.
It's the only one. And so we're going to lead off turn 2 with a Thoughtseize, revealing 2 copies of Rattleclaw Mystic, Savage Knuckleblade, and a couple of lands.
Yeah, we're probably just going to end up taking the Savage Knuckleblade here.
Oh, and a Treasure Cruise, it looks like.
Is that a Treasure Cruise?
Might be a Stubborn Denial. There are four full copies of Stubborn Denial in the main deck. Looks like it's actually Heir of the Wilds.
That's actually one of the reasons to play this deck. Stubborn Denial is one of the selling points for me for this deck. That card is great. Force Spike is actually pretty good in this format, but when it's a hard counter spell for 1 mana against instant sorcery, it's actually great.
Yeah, the 2 blue spells in Brian Kibler's version of this deck are Savage Knuckleblade, which might be the best red-blue-green creature ever printed. Also one of the top 3 Ogre Warriors in the
for sure.
ever printed.
Oh, for sure.
And, you know, Shahar is also playing Temur Charm, which has some good applications, allowing him to have another elimination spell in the form of Fight, and also has a counter spell mode, and also can falter his opponents, making them unable to block with smaller creatures like Hornet Queen tokens. So it gives him a little bit more choices. Dave elects to take one of the spells from Shahar's hand.
He took the Savage Knuckleblade.
Took the Savage Knuckleblade, and Shahar's going to lead things off with Rattleclaw Mystic.
It's generally one of the harder cards to deal with. If you can't kill it right away, it's very difficult to remove from the game. And all of Dave's creatures versus the creatures that Shahar has in hands are just bigger and better.
Yep, so. And there is one of the slightly bigger creatures, that's Courser of Crufix, that reveals another copy of itself off the top of the library. One of the many enchantment creatures that sees play in Standard these days. One of the top decks in the room is being played by a player named Zach Rayburn, and he has an interesting take on Mardu that has 2 main deck copies of Erase. To be able to deal with Coursers, Doomwake Giants, Whips of Eremos, and the like.
Yeah, there are almost no misses for that card in this format.
Quite potent. As we see, Shahar is going to drop 2 2-drops on his turn 3, with Rattleclaw Mystic and Heir of the Wilds making appearances on his turn 3. Dave, though, with the 2-4, able to keep those guys at bay. He's going to draw the Courser of Crufix and turn up Hero's Downfall off the top of his library, deciding how he wants to proceed. This is the kind of game that Dave wants.
Yeah, it's going to be a grindy match. Shahar's not coming out blazing. He doesn't have a Savage Knuckleblade attacking yet. He doesn't have a Stormbreath Dragon coming off the top yet, which is a very big problem card for Dave Williams in the match. This is the kind of start that Dave wants the game to be. He just clog up the board. He's going to possibly play a Siege Rhino this turn. He starts getting in there. I mean, he's going to have to trade with Heir of the Wilds, but he has a removal spell if he needs to get rid of Heir of the Wilds after he gets the Siege Rhino to play this turn.
Heir of the Wilds is... I love Heir of the Wilds. It's good on turn 2, and it's good on turn 8.
Dave was trying to decide whether he wanted to play Siege Rhino here versus Doomwake Giants, but I think he might want to Doomwake Giant next turn, killing the mana producers, because he knows unless Shahar top decks this turn, he has nothing to really spend his mana on. He has nothing that he's going to cash these, Rattleclaw Mystics on for a 5-drop or a 6-drop this turn.
Yep, and so he elects to just get the
board
threat
presence
into play, the 4/5 Trampler, with Shahar at 16 and Dave at 22. Both of his creatures much bigger than anything that Shahar currently can present. Heir of the Wilds and 2 Rattleclaw Mystics to his name, and in comes the Heir of the Wilds, pokes at Dave down to 19. Shahar's version of the deck does have slightly fewer threats than Brian Kibler's version, because he is hedging a little bit with Temur Charm, and we see a copy of Crater's Claws off the top for Shahar Shenhar.
So Dave's going to go into the tank here. He's going to try to decide whether he wants to use Utter End or just Doomwake Giant this turn. I think it's just a clear Doomwake Giant this turn. Or do we not have the 5th mana? Is that what's happening here? Yeah, Dave doesn't have the 5th mana, which he really, really needed this turn.
He's digging for it with the Courser of Crufix, so
we're trying to decide how we're going to proceed from here.
We're not in a bad spot.
Absolutely not.
Dave's deciding if he wants to try to swing into the red zone with his Siege Rhino here, or if there's something that's...
He's contemplating a Savage Knuckleblade on the way back. You know, if he wants to have something up that can block it, which it would still be a rough block if Shahar had another source of mana.
Looks like that Dave has decided that that is good enough, and he's going to leave the 4 mana up, probably to Hero's Downfall, whatever Shahar happens to have drawn over the last couple turns. Shahar still with his 3 2-power creatures in play, 2 of them being held back by the Courser of Crufix and the 4 toughness that it presents.
Shahar's looking for one of his big threats here, one of his big payoff creatures, but he's just going to play a land here and pass the turn, giving Dave an opening to kill the Heir of the Wilds and start to actually try to take this game over.
Yep, Heir of the Wilds is going to hit the bin thanks to the Hero's Downfall.
I like the tight play by Dave there, casting Hero's Downfall and not Utter End. And most people might, play Utter End there because it uses more mana, but it doesn't play into Stubborn Denial.
Right. The other thing is that Utter End cannot remove the Stormbreath Dragon, so using the Utter End to use all of your mana as efficiently as possible might be an attractive option, but he knows what he's up against, so he does not want to get countered by the Stubborn Denial.
Also, he could race the Stormbreath Dragon pretty well right now.
Looks like Temur Charm is going to counter the Siege Rhino.
Yeah, good old Mana Leak. It's still available to you guys. You just got to pay a lot more mana.
One of the modes on Temur Charm is counter target spell unless the controller pays 3. And that is going to deal with one of the Siege Rhinos.
Well, it looks like Dave actually found the 5th land this turn, but it's in the form of one that comes into play tapped.
Yep, unfortunate for him. He's not going to get to play that Doomwake Giant, although he is in quite good shape here, so...
Dave's going to gain 2 this turn after playing the second Courser.
And Shahar already down to 8 as Dave reveals Eidolon of Blossoms off the top. The one of in the main deck that we have come to know and love recently. He also has a copy of Reclamation Sage in his hand. This is one of the few decks where Reclamation Sage is not at its best. The only copy is being 3 copies of Boon Satyr in Shahar Shenhar's main deck.
Yeah, it's probably something he's going to immediately put into his sideboard after this game.
Yep, absolutely. I would agree with that. Shahar, lots of mana, not a lot to do with it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
A little bit behind the 8 ball, facing a Siege Rhino and a pair of Courser of Crufixes. Deciding how he digs out of this hole he's dug for himself, and he's decided that the best way to do it would be to win games 2 and 3 instead of trying to win game 1 anymore. So 1-0, Dave Williams over Shahar Shenhar.
Right, and in that game we saw what happens sometimes when you run a deck with a lot of mana-producing creatures.
Yep.
And sometimes that's all you draw. We saw Dave Thoughtseize, the only real threat that Shahar had in his hand early, and he just never drew into another actual real threat. And then Dave played really well and really tight from that point on, playing the Hero's Downfall instead of the Utter End when he had 4 mana was great. Like, what cards are in Shahar's hand that he, like, I don't remember if he actually saw the Stubborn Denial or not when he Thoughtseize them.
I don't believe he saw it. I don't think he did. But you can anticipate it.
I was about to say, when you're playing a game and your opponent doesn't play cards, and Dave is a poker player, so he's going to pick up on this kind of thing. You have to construct, what do you think he's doing? Like, what do you think he has in his hand? Why is he not doing anything? Because he was still playing lands. So the cards are either lands, or Stubborn Denial, or Temur Charm. It has to be the cards that are reactive. Otherwise, he'd be playing things.
Yep.
Because he's falling behind in this game. He can't, play cute and not play a Stormbreath Dragon. Because what if I draw another Thoughtseize? And things like that. So,
Dave's very good at, this is a morph creature format, by the way. It's almost unfair when professional poker players get to play against morph creatures. Because they can predict them very well.
At the PT, there's actually a really good match between David Williams and Paul Rietzel, newly minted Hall of Famer Paul Rietzel.
Yep, and those two players are teammates, by the way.
They're
they
very,
know each
very
other
good friends.
From their team GPs.
Right. So the match was great because they were mic'd during the match in a limited match, and Rietzel played a morph every turn from turn 3 to 6, and Dave correctly named the morph every time.
Yep.
It was insanely entertaining and just great to watch someone in their element just know things like that.
We've reached the point in the game where Dave can see through cards, and so it's a little bit
unfair. He is a
unfair.
smoke teller.
That is true. He can turn the cards face up without even paying the 2 mana. But after sideboard, it gets a little bit more difficult to predict because Shahar has some options in his sideboard that include 2 copies of Magma Spray, 3 Disdainful Strokes, 1 Temur Charm, 3 Arc Lightning, 2 Back to Nature, 2 Destructive Revelry, and a Sarkhan the Dragon Speaker. I would almost certainly expect Back to Natures here.
Right.
The new versions of these Abzan Whip decks are a lot more like Green-Black Devotion, so he's going to be able to pick up any stray coursers Doomwake Giants, and Whips of Erebos that are in play for a measly cost, 2 mana. I would also expect the Destructive Revelries for just the same reason. Possibly the Temur Charms, and certainly the Disdainful Strokes.
Yeah, it just matters what cards he wants to specifically answer with Temur Charm or Disdainful Stroke, because I don't think he's bringing in all of these cards, but he's going to bring in a smattering of them depending on play, draw, and what he thinks is insanely important in the matchup. If you knew Dave has Doomwake Giant, which I assume he does know, then I expect Disdainful Stroke and Temur Charms to come in, but at least Disdainful Stroke and Back to Nature for sure. And on Dave's side, we have 3 Drowned Sorrows, 1 Reclamation Sage, 1 Glare of Heresy, 1 Hero's Downfall, 2 Bile Blight, 1 Farika, God of Affliction, 1 Silence of Believers, 1 Thoughtseize, 2 Eidolon Blossoms, and 2 Ajani, Mentor of Heroes.
Yep, this is a very similar list that we've seen the last couple of rounds.
AJ's playing, I think, almost
a lot of the
very
pros
big
here
copy,
are playing the Jerry Thompson list.
Right. Now, I really I expect to see either Bile Blights or Drowned Sorrows somewhere in Dave's list, but this is where the game comes in between 2 professionals. Shahar knows what Dave's doing. Dave knows what Shahar's doing. So you have to go to the next level, but then you have to wonder, is my opponent going to that level? Is he taking out some of the cards that are bad against this card? Like, is he taking out Air of the Wilds and going to have all these reactive cards so that my cards like Drowned Sorrow and Bile Blight are bad? And then he just has all these good cards against my bad cards. Things like that. So I think he's going to bring the Hero's Downfall just because it's just great in every situation. And I think some of the Drowned Sorrows or Bile Blights are going to come in, not too much. It's also possible the Silence the Believers comes in because it's another answer to Stormbreath Dragon that he has a problem with. Other than that, maybe the Thoughtseize, and then it's going to be very simple from there. He's going to change out a few of his removal spells, make them better for the situations they're going to be in, and then whatever he thinks Shahar is going to do.
One quick note from one of our backup matches, we mentioned Zach Rayburn, who's playing Mardu with the main deck Erases. He is up a game over one of our grinder winners from yesterday, Jeremy Montano. Jeremy is still playing that mono black aggro deck that we mentioned. You know what else has a lot of enchantment creatures in it? Mono black aggro. So I wouldn't have been surprised if that Erased took out a Herald of Torment or a Gnarled Scarhide, something along those lines last game, maybe a Spiteful Return. A lot of targets.
I can't wait to see a Back to Nature happen against the mono black deck. Just 2 mana Wrath You. Like 1 in a green, Wrath of God You seems awesome.
Is it an instant or is it a sorcery? I think it's a sorcery.
I think it's a sorcery.
2 mana still is quite good value. As we're going to toss it back down to the match, take a look at Shahar Shenhar and Dave Williams shuffling up for game 2. Shahar Shenhar, by the way, is the first 2-time world champion. He is also a back-to-back world champion. And oh, by the way, it's the last 2 years is he the world champion. We are in the presence of someone who is almost certainly going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, even though he does not yet have a Pro Tour top.
You know what else is hard to believe about Shahar Shenhar? Because you've been hearing about him for years now. This is probably like the 3rd year that he's really been on the scene. He's 21.
He's
in a newly minted 21.
You know what? 21 years old, and this is his first time in Las Vegas as a 21-year-old. We'll have to get a little bit of reaction from him on what he's going to do at the age of 21 in Las Vegas.
Do you think there was a chance he wouldn't have made the tournament today?
Well, if he's hanging out with some of the folks that we have in the room who certainly know how to party here in Las Vegas, then it might be might have been a little bit difficult for him to wake up as we see a mulligan to 6 from Shahar.
And a Thoughtseize from Dave is again going to take his hand apart.
Mulligan to 6 followed by a Thoughtseize is not where he wants to be. We see 2 copies of Ashcloud Phoenix, a Temur Charm, a Savage Knuckleblade, and a Destructive Revelry with naught but 2 lands in play.
I think Dave is probably going to take the Savage Knuckleblade here, depending on what he's doing, what his hand is. This is just, in a vacuum, I would probably take Savage Knuckleblade here. And then as long as he can develop his board for the rest of the games, this should be an easy game if Shahar doesn't top deck a land the next turn or 2.
Right. Shahar does have both colors, or all 3 colors of mana, so all he needs is any other kind of mana off the top. Be it a Yavimaya Coast, a Temple of Abandon, a Frontier, Mbuviak, Mana Confluence, or a Basic. So it looks like he's deciding between the Temur Charm and the Savage Knuckleblade, and he decides to take the Savage Knuckleblade. It is the best card, and it's the reason to play the Temur Monsters deck, really.
Dave also already has a copy of Utter End in his hand to answer one of the Phoenixes very cleanly if the game gets to that point, especially if we may see our first morph in this format.
Absolutely,
today.
Yeah. Ashcloud Phoenix is quite a good morph, I would say, and it's also one of the few morphs that you cast face up more often than you play it face down. This one, however, is face down. It is a mystery. Right. It could be a Rattleclaw Mystic. You don't know.
He could have top decked Rattleclaw Mystic.
Temur Monsters is the deck that has the most morphs in the format, for sure. So, there is a morph, and here we see Sylvan Caryatid from Dave, and possibly not a third land from him either, which would be quite interesting.
Well, Shahar just top decked his 4th land here in Frontier Bivouac. Shahar's back in this game all of a sudden.
Oh, absolutely.
So what he can do this turn is he can either morph another Ashcall Phoenix or leave up Timber Charm while playing his 4th land. It depends on whether he's afraid of a certain card from Dave, or if, which this is really good here. Do you have to have a legal target for fight with Timber Charm, or can you just make it a 3/3 here?
I don't know.
I think Dave actually just has to read the card.
Dave was like, "Can I take a look at the other Ashcloud Phoenix in your hand?" And he decides that he is gonna. I think he decided to block there. And so Shahar plays Frontier Bivouac and passes the turn with Temur Charm mana up, and I like that play a lot because it's going to be able to counter pretty much anything of relevance that Dave would want to play.
Now Dave did draw a land, but again we're seeing lands that come into play tapped.
The tri-lands are very good, particularly on turn 1, not so much on turn 4. Dave deciding how he wants to proceed. He has great cards in his hand, but he needs time to play them. And so we're going to see Satyr Wayfinder here.
I love this play by Dave. He physically showed Shahar the cards in his hand without showing him what they were, counted them to make it look like he was going to miss a land drop, was seeing if he was going to have to discard, and then he casts Satyr Wayfinder and puts on stack like, may I have this? Like hoping that Shahar counters it since he drew the land this turn. We're seeing a bunch of gamesmanship between two players here trying to find the smallest edge to put them forward in the matchup.
Yep, if Dave can actually get the Temur Charm out of Shahar's hand there, that's quite a big swing in the match because Shahar wouldn't be able to counter a future Siege Rhino or Whip of Erebos or something else powerful like that. So Dave is going to put another copy of Satyr Wayfinder in his graveyard, and he's actually going to choose the Forest, which means he's going to have an untapped land next turn.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see if he plays that land. Yeah, he's going to want to play another 2-drop.
And so he does play the Sylvan Caryatid number 2.
Char's okay with just letting this resolve. The Timber Charm is worth too much than to stop Dave's 5th mana.
Looks like he might try to tempt Dave with another 2-for-1 here. He might fight, give the creature +1/+1, make it a 3/3, which would kill off the Satyr, and also fight the 1/1 Satyr Wayfinder. Dave is tempting him with that option, if he so chooses.
This is a good bit of value for your Timber Charm, so Shahar's actually going to take a little while to consider it. I think Dave is fine with it either way, since it keeps Shahar from developing his board this turn. Plus, Dave can still untap and Utter End a Phoenix if Shahar were to play it the next turn, or he can untap and kill Shahar's Morph. So I love these plays by Dave. Dave is playing this game very tightly, and is continually to confuse Shahar with some of his plays since he knows his hand.
Yep.
Shahar is taking his time to try to figure out what Dave is doing.
A lot of interesting gamesmanship going on here. It looks like that Shahar did not call. He allowed the block to happen, and here comes an Ashcloud Phoenix. And a 5th land from Shahar, representing Stubborn Denial. So Dave gets to untap, and now is actually going to be able to cast some spells of some relevance. He has 5 mana currently, and 6 cards in hand, including Utter End, Hero's Downfall, and it looks like 2 copies of lands, as well as Eidolon of Blossoms.
Dave actually knows the entire contents of Shahar's hand from the earlier Thoughtseize. He knows the Destructive Reverie is still there, along with the Timber Charm, so he's going to be able to play whatever he wants this turn, like Utter End the Phoenix.
Yep, he decides to Utter End the Phoenix, getting rid of both sides.
Right. I would be surprised if he Bile-Blighted the other one here.
Looks like he is simply going to pass the turn. If he has Bile-Blight in hand, that would certainly counter the Temur Charm 2-for-1 ability that Shahar might have wanted to cash in on. And now without the Ashcloud Phoenix, depending on what the contents of Shahar's hand is, if he has another threat, then it might be another coin flip style situation. Does he want to add more to his board, or does he want to try to cash in on this 2-for-1 with Temur Charm? In comes the Morph, another block with Sylvan Caryatid.
I think this might be the turn that we're going to cash in the Timber Charm, since we don't have a ton going on. And if it is, Dave's going to get insane value from this Bile-Blight.
Yep, so Temur Charm, +1/+1, and fight. And in response, Bile-Blight, not only countering the Temur Charm, but also getting rid of the threat on the board. A clean 2-for-1.
I love the way that Dave Williams played this game. He's paced it the way he wanted to. He's known what Shahar is going to do at every step. You're seeing the inner poker player come out.
Yep, absolutely. And poking for 1 damage probably again here.
Well, we're going to play a whip pre-combat. We got to get our value.
Whip of Erebos coming down pre-combat for Dave Williams, getting that 1 lifelink poking in there. Gain 1, deal 1. Shahar Shenhar down to 19, Dave at 18. Oh, those flipped this turn, so Shahar down to 18 and Dave up to 19. Shahar appears to not have a ton of threats in his hand, so he simply has to pass the turn. Dave firmly in the catbird seat. What does Shahar have to do in order to get back into this game? What kind of cards does he have to draw, and how does he have to have Dave play in order to try to steal a game?
He's going to have the Destructive Revelry, this whip, for 1, and then start top decking huge monsters turn after turn, like Stormbreath Dragons. Multiple Stormbreath Dragons or Phoenixes will be great here. As we said yesterday, flying is still at a huge premium against the Abzan decks, and then he has to fade Dave getting a Hornet Queen.
Yep. We have Eidolon of Blossom's engine online as well, by the way, playing a Courser of Crufix and drawing a card off of it. So, on all cylinders is Dave Williams. Getting the train rolling. Back to Nature's still in Shahar's deck, by the way, and it is an instant. We had that confirmed earlier. And there it is.
Oh, wow, there it is, the Back to Nature. I thought it was Negate earlier when I looked at it, but then I checked the list and that card wasn't in there.
Back to Nature, destroying Eidolon of Blossoms, Courser of Crufix, and Whip of Erebos. All 3 copies.
Now that's how we get back into this game.
Yep, a 2-mana 3-for-1 is a good way to do things.
Guys, go order your Back to Natures now. The card is about to get really good in Standard.
The card is quite powerful. Whip of Erebos being one of the most powerful cards, the most powerful late game in Standard, and being able to clean up anything that it brings along for the party, like Eidolon of Blossoms, Doomwake Giant, and a Courser of Crufix, quite potent.
That was one of the better Back to Natures I've seen in a long time.
Oh, absolutely. Not since Modern, when I was playing a lot of Boggles, have I seen a Back to Nature quite that good.
You would play Boggles.
Oh, I love Boggles.
You're that guy.
They're quite slippery.
So when I played in the Modern Pro Tour in Spain last year, about 6 of the 9 to 10 people that we were testing with, maybe 5, so about half of my team were playing Boggles. There was only 1 dealer at the Magic site for the event. We went up there, and when I found this out, I knew the decks the other teams were playing, that some other teams were playing and planning on playing. I actually bought them out of Celestial Flares at the time. I bought like 60 copies of Celestial Flares from the dealer.
Just so that no one else could have them?
Just so that my teammates didn't have to play against the card, because we're in Spain. It's hard to find a copy of Celestial Flare if you didn't bring it with you.
That's an interesting thing that happens at, particularly at destination Pro Tours, I find, like Honolulu. I know that one of the cards that was extremely hard to find was Uril the Mist Stalker.
I believe they went to like $50.
They were up to $50 or so. Elish Norn Grand Cenobite at that Pro Tour was up to $75. I know Sword of War and Peace went up astronomically, and
like
way back in the day, there was a common named Yavi Maya Barbarian.
Right.
Common. That was $5 the morning of the tournament.
I've heard of Naturalizes going for 15 when Astral Slide first made its first appearance, and people were cracking packs on the site trying to find them. Yeah,
there are a couple cards, like Slash Panthers were up to 15 at one point on the floor of Vintage Champs one year. There are some interesting cards that the market goes wild for. As we see, Dave is going through how he decides he wants to win this game, as he has many options on how he wants to proceed. It looks like he has Eidolon of Blossoms and Siege Rhino. He elects to begin with Siege Rhino, going up to 18 life, and Shahar down to 14.
Yeah, this is actually a pretty good rebuild after the back-breaking Back to Nature we had earlier.
Yep.
Shahar definitely has not drawn very well in the games that we've had him on camera this weekend. I actually kind of feel for him. He's been very flooded in the games and hasn't really been able to put up much of a fight in a lot of the games. A lot of the games that we've seen him win have been just blowouts on his side.
Yep. And we're going to see a second 4-drop in Eidolon of Blossoms.